Welcome back, fellow conspirators. It is I, LG Grande, the new number 6, the G-Man with my G-Plan, and you are a fellow conspirator in the Liberty Conspiracy, because freedom is out of fashion nowadays. Thank you so much for everything you've been doing over on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on BitChute. We only have a few subscribers on BitChute, and yet the numbers of views are as high as what we're getting over on YouTube. Don't forget, everybody, the plan is to try to expand on both platforms and even more platforms, including DLive and others, so that we can live stream and have all sorts of guests on and do a lot of really interesting things by reaching out to you in your area and allowing you to speak out about things you find interesting and important. But the key is to allow you to tell other people about what we're doing, ask them to share, ask them to subscribe, and ask them to do the same thing. Ask to other people and to spread the word. Thank you, everybody. Don't forget, you can find me over on Twitter, not under Liberty Conspiracy, but under Guard Goldsmith. There is no Liberty Conspiracy on Twitter, but there is the conspiracy for freedom nonetheless through our communication at Guard Goldsmith on Twitter. All right, everybody, you know what it's time for? It's time for a news scan. So let's start with probably the most recent piece that you might have seen over at MRC TV that I wrote, and this isn't just for self-promotion, it's because I feel it's a pretty important story, and it's sad, and it's emotional, and it's frustrating, and I'm not going to talk too much about it because this is MRC TV's purview, but and again, it's not just to promote it, but I do want to tell you about this one. If you haven't heard about this, the BBC has, as we expected they eventually would, come for Fawlty Towers, and they'll probably be coming for Monty Python very soon. They have eliminated one of the greatest, funniest episodes of the entire series of Fawlty Towers, and it was on for 2 seasons. They did 2 years. It took them to do one, and 2 years. They waited a few years. They did another one. John Cleese and Connie Booth. This one is The Germans, and it is absolutely hilarious. I'll just draw your attention to this article that is on MRC TV, and my thanks to the MRC TV team. And of course, they're doing it because of identity politics, political correctness, the unfortunate offspring of postmodernism and collectivism. And of course, really, postmodernism was created to serve collectivism. So, and identity politics, they're all part of the same thing. It's all labeling people and demonizing people and casting aspersions onto people, even when you don't really have any evidence, so that you can gain political leverage over people. And of course, making everybody sensitized to things, even when things are done satirically to make a humorous point, which is exactly what they were doing in the Germans episode of Fawlty Towers. It was hilarious. I could show clips from it right now. I could show all sorts of things, interviews with John Cleese and Connie Booth, in fact, his wife at the time, who co-wrote most of the episodes with him and co-created the program with him, after they were actually inspired by visiting an inn in Torquay, where they actually met the innkeeper, who was much like Basil Fawlty. And I won't do that, however, because there will be a video coming out probably in the next 12 to 24 hours at MRC TV's YouTube site, and maybe over on their Facebook page as well. And so I want to let that one just sit as it is, as a headline. I also want to give you another funny, sad commentary from another MRC TV writer. She is Britney Hughes. She's the assistant editor. She's awesome. And Britney wrote a piece over the weekend, this one released on June 12th, you can see, about Seattle's autonomous zone, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, and we'll be talking about that one shortly. As a protester, and of course they formed because they were so upset about police brutality. They are supposedly anarchists, wink wink, but they're not. They're all in favor of government authority and taxing and taking away from people, and they're supposedly against possessions, and yet we'll see in another little piece on CHAZ a little bit later that that is not the case. They're all in favor of possessions as long as it's their possessions, not your possessions. They'll try to take it if they think you've got too much. As you can see, Seattle Autonomous Zone protesters call 911, which is a joke, by the way. Yes, Flavor was right, over literal dumpster fire. Seriously, you can read this one. Obviously, it's gotten crazy amounts of views over the past number of days. It's really It's amazing. And there's even more to the hypocrisy. I'll get deeper into that and give a big tip of the hat to New Zealand's Esoteric Ed. That's not his name. It stands for Esoteric Detective, ED. He started with The Outer Dark. He has The Outer Light. The Outer Dark, if you haven't seen that channel on YouTube, please go watch the videos he did about the Pope's conference hall. That's all I have to tell you. There are a couple videos. You'll see what I'm talking about if you go to YouTube. So I hope you get a chance to check that one out. Britney comes from the more traditional conservative side of things. She's not necessarily full-on voluntarist, but I really like the way that she approaches stories, and she hits home runs so often. Boy, I had to show you this one. I really, really dig that. And I want to turn to the next one, and this one has some bleed over into the series of Supreme Court rulings and opinions that have been released over the past few days. There's always a flurry of these things that come around in mid-June. And today, yesterday, over the weekend, last week, they're all coming at us like a tsunami. This one is not a Supreme Court ruling, but I wanted to show it to you because it is sort of indirectly tied to a Supreme Court ruling that has to do with homosexual people and the denial of so-called rights by their employers. That was part of a Supreme Court ruling, and I'll get to that. And we're not going to touch too deeply on that. I'll do a separate video on that. But just to sort of give us a little bit of flavor about what's happening nowadays is this one from NBC. First, I want to point out its unbelievable bias, and then we'll go just a little bit deeper into why this has a relationship with the Supreme Court rulings. And it's not about this specific healthcare thing. The ruling is about employment, but we'll talk about it. And if you're hip to the whole concept of private property, what the Constitution actually says in the Interstate Commerce Clause, you'll understand where I'm going anyway. But as you can see here, the headline, Trump administration issues rule to curtail health protections for transgender people. Now, obviously, if you're a peacefully minded person, you're saying to yourself, I thought the government was there to protect people, and here we have protections for transgender people. This is terrible. How dare that? And of course, it'll all tie in, Trump is some bad dude and all this stuff. Well, look, I'm no fan of Trump, but he's not taking away protections from people. So I wrote this. I said, it's almost amusing to see how pop media can portray a decrease in fascistic commands over private voluntary interactivity as a loss of protections. This has to do with the government forcing businesses to have to handle transgender issues for health care for their employees. The change to the Affordable Care Act, massively unconstitutional if you just want to look at it on that superficial constitutional level. If you want to go a little bit deeper, it's incredibly unethical because it's all aggression and force telling people how they have to run their businesses and live their lives. Please, can we just leave people alone and stop pretending it's protection when you're threatening people? That's a protection racket. That's not protection in any way. The change to the Affordable Care Act will eliminate protections from discrimination based on gender identity, which of course, as we know, is infinite, so it's completely unmanageable. And again, this is classic tragedy of the commons. You're taking something which is a private interaction, deciding whether you want to take a job from someone when it's offered to you or you want to employ someone, and it's no different than buying a product or a service from someone than it is from employing or taking a job from someone. If I sell you a thing, it's no different than selling you my services as an employee. I have certain stipulations. I decide whether it makes my life better to make the sale, and you decide whether it makes your life better to make the sale as well. It's an interactive exchange. We both are doing it voluntarily based on our own decisions. Nobody's enslaving these people. This is utterly absurd. But this is the way they portray it, because of course it's all David versus Goliath. It's the employer is the exploiter, even though the employer relies on employees and competes for good employees, and they all rely on the consumer. So is the consumer exploiting people? Should we tell consumers that they have to buy things from people and that they have to do X, Y, or Z when they buy them? Give an extra penny to a person who's considering himself to be transgender or transracial or whatever? Do they have to give extra consideration to someone? I mean, how ridiculous is it? And I've brought this up before. When you have private property recognition and all of a sudden a government official, some politician comes in and says, oh, no, you can't discriminate, as we say. Well, in order to exist, all living creatures that actually have brains discriminate. Even plants discriminate between hot and cold, dark and light, dry and wet, right? We're designed that way. In order to survive, we have to discriminate, right? Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that when people choose, they're necessarily making choices that are based on purely being nice people. But I don't control them. So here's an example. If you live in a society, some town somewhere, where it's 99.9% of the people who are completely non-discriminatory, not prejudiced in any way against anybody, and there's one skinhead Nazi in your town, does that mean if you own a business, you have to cater to the minority and sell to the Nazi skinhead? That's the way it works if he's the minority, right? It's ridiculous. And wouldn't you want to know if someone were prejudiced against other people? Rather than hiding it behind the veil of you'll be punished by the law, why not let people expose themselves and then you won't be giving them money unwittingly? I mean, how stupid can it be? This forces people to have to associate, and it retards our ability to sense whether people are good or bad people. I mean, how dumb can you get? So this is a perfect example of it. The change to the Affordable Care Act will eliminate protections. No, it won't eliminate protections. It just won't add a certain amount of force that's already been forced. So this is what I wrote over on Facebook. I mean, it is just amazing. It's almost amusing to see how pop media can portray a decrease in fascistic commands over private voluntary interactivity as a loss of protections. If an author wanted to sell novels, but the government dictated to him or her that each book had to get the approval of the state, and that if anyone complained about the contents of the plot or the pronouns that the author used, the author could be fined, and if the author didn't pay the fine, could be approached by cops, shut down, and potentially thrown in jail, one wonders if the author would call that protection. The book buyer is free to not buy if the product doesn't look satisfactory, and the seller should be free to deny the buyer if the sale doesn't look satisfactory. How hard is it to be peaceful? Like, why do people get so stressed out about leaving their neighbors alone? I just don't understand. And this is a point directed to Stephen King, by the way, because he's all over social justice stuff. And sometimes he makes mistakes, and he's a decent guy. You know, he's an okay dude. Like so many of these people, their hearts are in the right place, but they don't think these things through when they're thinking about employing the state to apply force to make other people live the way they want them to live. It doesn't work that way. It's not universalizable. It's just amazing. It's incredible. All right, so then there's Britney's story. Now, I want to go over to the Supreme Court. This one, Supreme Court refuses to hear new challenge to gun restrictions. I'm going to go into these in greater detail. I just want to give you these headlines and read a couple paragraphs so you know what's going on. Obviously, most of the people in this audience, you guys are already on top of this stuff, but I just want to mention these things, and we'll do a separate video on the Supreme Court stories, either all as one video or we'll split it into two, and I'll break everything down for you. But you can see this coming from a mile away. The Supreme Court wasted little time Monday making clear its reluctance to wade back into the national battle over gun rights. So in other words, they don't really care about rights in any way whatsoever. It's all political. They're not going to talk about these things. After refusing to rule on a challenge to the New York City gun restrictions, we heard about this case a couple weeks ago, because they were rescinded, the restrictions were rescinded while the case was pending. still doesn't matter. They can put things back if they want to. So the plaintiffs had a definite point. And we'll talk about that. You can watch, I did an MRC TV video on that, and perhaps I'll just do a quick overview of the article for that for you sometime, and I'll pull some things for it so you can understand that. The court turned away all potential replacements that would have given its conservative justices a chance to strengthen the Second Amendment. Strengthen the Second Amendment. You mean to actually acknowledge that it exists, supposedly to restrict the government and stop it from infringing on the rights we inherently have. The justices had a long list of challenges to choose from, including several testing the threshold issue of whether guns can be carried in public nationwide. Well, no kidding. Of course they're supposed to be able to. What do you mean, whether they can? Duh, as they currently are in some 40 states. And of course, as I've mentioned before, with the full faith and credit clause of the Constitution, even if one accepts the concept that states can license people for holding guns or holding guns outside where they're visible or holding guns where they're concealed or any other dumb stipulations that they put on the supposed right, hence saying that it's not really a right when it actually is, of course, because if you don't have a right to self-defense, you don't have a right to life. And that was the whole predicate upon which Locke said government exists in the first place. Duh. But anyway, and the fact that the Constitution is founded on Lockean natural rights, found in the second treatise, written in the 1670s. A lot of people miss that stuff. It's not too hard to figure it out, and it doesn't take too long to research it. But most people are too busy watching The Bachelor, I guess, right? And wondering whether the WNBA is going to come back. Unfrigging believable. So stupid. But anyway, with the full faith and credit clause, if you get a legally binding document or a legal license in one state, it's supposed to be fully recognized by all state governments. That's why you can drive in other states. That's why you can rent a car in other states, because your driver's license does get reciprocity. But of course, they're hypocritical and they don't allow reciprocity for gun licenses in all 50 states. And of course, every time politicians who might be even maybe slightly leaning towards the Constitution try to introduce reciprocity for gun licenses in Washington, D.C., it gets shot down. I wonder who could possibly shoot it down. Maybe, Democrats and liberal Republicans and even moderate Republicans, so-called? Yeah. Anyway, by refusing to take a new case so quickly after declaring, the other issues included bans on assault weapons, high-capacity magazines, and handgun sales. I mean, just poison. So we'll go into that in more detail in a little bit. Another high court decision. High court won't hear law enforcer qualified immunity cases. No kidding. What a shock. Well, thankfully, Rand Paul has introduced a bill, which obviously will go nowhere, to try to stop the qualified immunity for police officers, which would be a really good thing. And of course, it's not going to go anywhere. The U.S. Supreme Court declined to take on several cases involving the controversial qualified immunity rule that shields public officials, including law enforcers, from, I love how they call them law enforcers, they're statute enforcers, from being answerable in court for even the most egregious allegations of rights violations. And that goes back to, as I've mentioned many times before, and I did a podcast about this in Liberty Conspiracy, the old royal concept of the royal we, where the state is immune. As a French king once said, right before a lot of violence in France in the 17th century, l'état c'est moi. I am the state. Or the state is me, if you want to translate it. And this one, Supreme Court rules gay workers protected from job discrimination, and big win for LGBT rights. We'll go into that a little bit more, but you can see the Supreme Court handed a big win to the LGBT community. Where is that? Is that sort of like the CHAZ zone? Is there like a wall, like a rainbow wall or something like that? Monday, ruling in a 6-3 decision that, and by the way, I could care less about somebody's sexual preferences. I've been to gay marriages, but I don't care. I don't care. Just don't try to force people to accept what you want them to accept. Just leave people alone. How's that? There you go. Ruling in a 6-3 decision that an employer who fires a worker for being gay or transgender violates Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. Oh, I see. Nothing like private property or understanding that freedom of association includes the freedom not to associate. Okay, so there you go. There's a lot there. And I want to draw your attention to this one from the awesome Liberty Doll. Dun, dun, dun. This is great. I'm not going to play any of this. I just hope that you go watch this video. Just released. I mean, literally just out. It's probably up to 12,000 by now. I watched it a couple hours ago. Nintendo releases Antifa video game. And I can't even say anything. You gotta see Liberty Doll's video. In fact, I put a couple of these things into this video just so that I will refer you to a couple other videos and websites. Liberty Doll is one, and Ed at the Outer Light is the other. Actually, one other, and another is coming right up here. I mean, seriously, this is Nintendo, an Antifa video game, and you gotta see it. You gotta see what she has to say. It's so perfect what she has to say. Mordantly funny, concise, witty, just so sharp, Liberty Doll. Absolutely great. This one, another brilliant woman, Lisa Hayden, the generalist. This is great. Why you should never argue the constitutionality of forced vaccination. It's not that you'll lose, it's that you're accepting certain positions that don't need to be accepted because you have ownership of yourself. Beautiful, beautiful stuff from Lisa. I hope you go to the Generalist. It's a great website. Check it out. I mean, she is just, she nails this. Nails this. Now, I mentioned I wanted to talk about Esoteric Ed. This is his alternate channel that he started a while back, The Outer Light. I found him when he was doing The Outer Dark. He stopped doing that because he was just so bummed out by so many of the things he was covering. But again, it's still on YouTube, and I think you can find it on BitChute. And if you go to The Outer Dark, definitely watch a bunch of his videos, and definitely watch his videos, as I mentioned, about the Pope's audience hall, the exterior, the interior. Ed has a background in carpentry and architecture, and he's just amazing in recognizing visual stuff. He's awesome. Oh, and watch his thing on the Goddard Tunnel thing. That is phenomenal. Ed's the best. And so anyway, I want to play you a little bit of what Ed is covering in the CHAZ zone, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone in Seattle, where a bunch of people have gone in who are anarchists supposedly, but they're really collectivist socialists who are opposed to private property, opposed to making money for profit, and opposed supposedly to the police. And what's happening? Well, as you can see, as Britney Hughes brought up, right off the bat, they contacted, where is it? Here it is. They contacted the police over a dumpster fire, and as Ed points out, they're in dire need of materials. And it gets even worse. Yes, the people who took over portions of Seattle and took over private property of businesses and stores, businesses and apartment buildings and all sorts of things in there, who don't know, seemingly don't know how to plant plants. I mean, I worked at a farm stand for years out in the fields, picking and planting stuff. And I know what green thumb means. I know what redneck means now because I got a redneck from being out in the sun so long. That's back when I had hair, but yeah, it was rough. And it was fun. We had a great time. But Ed is covering a bunch of the things that they need now. How strange. Perhaps reading I, Pencil by a man named Reed might help them understand the way markets work and why voluntary action is so important for the supply chain and the price system to allow the supply chain to function. And then Ed gets into another thing. I'm going to end up scrolling ahead a little bit because you got to see what they did to this dude who went in as a test. He videotaped it beforehand. He told people, like, look, we're going in. I'm going to preach Christianity in here, and I want to see how they react. He's a real strong guy, so he was prepared. They choked him. They brought him down to the ground, and their armed police people did to this guy what has upset so many of the Black Lives Matters protesters and so on about what the police have done to people. Yeah, so here's Ed. This is awesome.
And you can go into a meditative state because it's hard to even make sense of what it means. Here's a list of things that they need in CHAZ. They say they need clothes, but then they put a M dash there where they say male pants, male shirts, belts. What do they mean about males and men's shoes? I thought they didn't believe in gender categorization like that. And they say ice, they need ice, the good kind. I'm guessing that's methamphetamine. They say they need cigarettes and lighters. And think about all these types of things that are projected from wider society, like clothes, which are a technology. I mean, they require cotton or different kinds of materials that have a long chain of production in order to create clothes as well as to manufacture them. And here lies the thing about them being so small they would never succeed. They can only exist because they are a symptom of a larger society itself. Without the larger society, they would be walking around naked with spears, probably not being able to hunt anything or even build anything that they can actually live inside. But who knows?
Now this is where I will just bring up something. I think Ed has a point, but I think he could expand on this point a little bit, which is that they could survive. I mean, you look at Hong Kong, no natural resources, tiny little spot, and yet flourished because they were basically without a lot of regulations, and they had skills. This is the thing. So if these people have something to trade, they can prosper. They can work, they can do all sorts of different things. But trade is not part of their philosophy, or is it? Because Ed actually shows in this video, and I won't go into it too much, but Ed shows in this video, they got guys in the streets selling t-shirts, making money. So what happens if that guy makes more than other people make inside the CHAZ zone? Are they going to redistribute the wealth? And what about the looters? As I mentioned in one of my MRC TV videos, if a looter gets more than another looter, do they have to loot the looter? I mean, does it become like Dennis Moore, the Monty Python skit? As at the end of it, spoiler, he says, oh, this redistribution of wealth thing is more difficult than I thought. Because he's constantly trying to make everything equal. I mean, it's totally Rousseauian. It's just beautiful. So I want to scroll ahead up to here. Okay, and we'll see if the video picks up from here. Because this will show you, this is the guy who went into the CHAZ, the religious guy preaching Christianity, and it'll show you what they did to him. Perfect example.
Note how full of racism their speech is, or how they talk. Everything's soaked in race and divisionary systems.
Yeah,
Let's take a look at this
stop.
video.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I understand. You've already dealt with one situation just from being here.
Hold on a second. Maybe I can.
Are you okay, by the way?
Are you okay? Like, I'm sorry
Okay.
that happened to you.
Yeah,
Not
okay.
everyone,
All right.
all of us have different sets of values that we're trying to honor here, and that's why we're trying to come to
The vast
peacefully.
majority of people I've seen
You
are
know?
peaceful,
Yeah,
but
we're trying to come to you peacefully
unfortunately,
and just let you know, like, hey, people have a lot of trauma. A lot of us have PTSD from flash bombs, from getting messed up, and to come to a space that we view so sacred, and to disrupt it, you're going to be met with intense opposition.
Well, it doesn't need to be seen as disruptive. People should rejoice at the preaching of the gospel. They should love what I'm saying.
Sure,
but they
sure.
don't. That's
I
the
understand
problem.
that. But many people do. It's just not the.
So there's your inclusivity right there. There's your inclusivity. It's just beautiful. There we go. Yeah, this computer is like slow, but yeah, there's the inclusivity, just perfect for you right there. It's like, yeah, well, you know, we're inclusive of everybody, but you better hit the road, man. So let's see if we can get to some of the. Okay, so here's where the guy was trying to preach a little bit later in a different area. And sure enough, it might have been earlier, actually. I don't know. But sure enough, here's what happened.
That is what we're all about here. And when you
They supposedly had a free speech zone. They're trying to take his speaker from him.
This is autonomous capital zone!
No one is trying to hold you captive, but you cannot play the speaker anymore.
Yes, I will!
You cannot. No, you cannot.
we will.
You cannot.
Yes, we will.
Preach the case.
We will preach the case. We will talk about our king!
He's gonna go.
Guy's strong. That's awesome.
Why is it all about you guys? This is America. Let go! America. God damn it! Hey, let go! Let go of me!
There you go.
We're done. I see you. Here you go. I don't see you. Black voices. I don't see you here. That's voices. Indigenous voices. Oh, come here, choco! I know. Stop choking yourself. You're choking me. Luis, let him go. Luis. I am a free citizen. But also the autonomous zone can choose.
Now, they end up dragging this man away, and there's another scene where he has a sign. They're literally putting the sign up under his chin and choking the guy. It's like on a pole, and it's, you know, like one of these banner things. And so I'll find the link. I'll try to post the link to some of the longer footage. I emailed it to somebody, so I definitely have the link for some of the longer footage, which is, I think you can find it on Twitter if they haven't gotten rid of it. So anyway, just unbelievable, the hypocrisy of these Chaz people. Oh, there's the Trump thing. Now, I want to draw your attention to this story as we sort of round things off. There are a couple other small things I want to bring up. I want to get serious for just a minute and mention, if you haven't had the opportunity, please watch this video. It's a documentary that I made, and it took a long time to put this together. I was sick throughout a bunch of it, you know, writing up the script, and I mean, at times it was intense. Took, you know, a couple days to edit. You know, it was intense, but I thought it was important because it deals with Dan Dix and what happened to him in Vancouver twice, as people completely ignorant of what he has done in Canada with Press for Truth. He's been excellent. You can find the Press for Truth channel on YouTube. I'm sure it's demonetized. You can find Dan Dix, and it's at Dan Dix PFT on Twitter, and the D and D are capitalized. And Dan just did a remarkable job up there. He's highlighted all sorts of stories about police brutality, and I thought it was really important to do a video about what the Black Lives Matter marchers did to him and expand on it by describing the madness of crowds. And in it, I explain, I just want to let you know, there's a lot of scholarship in it. There are lots of examples in it. There's a thesis to what I put together in that, and it is that the madness of crowds isn't necessarily the madness of crowds per se. I think in certain instances people can feed off of each other in these crowd situations, but I ask the question, why is it that most often when people congregate, you don't get violence and craziness and stuff like that, and people destroying property? Why is it music festivals are huge, and why can people go to sporting events and, you know, it's relatively not a problem? Maybe there's something different. Maybe it's not just the madness of crowds. Maybe there's something inherent in the crowd themselves and where they are, the crowds themselves and where they are. And my thesis is it's the madness of the collective, the political collective, not the voluntary collective, the political collective. And so I carry that through in this video. And just to let you know, I think some people, because I'm focusing on what happened to Dan because of Black Lives Matter, some people might look at it as, oh, well, you're just being right-wing and defending Dan. And Dan's not right-wing. He's free market, okay? He's anti-authoritarian, whether it's a left authoritarian, so-called, or right authoritarian. He just doesn't want the authority. He's in favor of freedom. And he was just out there asking people what they thought, what their opinions were, and they just didn't even know who he was. They started calling him Nazi and stuff. He got assaulted in the second time, and he got arrested by the cops. It was ridiculous. And so some people might think, oh, well, you know, you're defending just, you're against the Black Lives Matter people and stuff. It's like, no, look, everybody, how many times have I written about, posted stuff about police wrongdoing? I just, you know, wrongdoing is wrongdoing, right? And the existence of the police is predicated on wrongdoing because it's the state which is predicated on wrongdoing. You can't get around that. It is impossible to get around the fact that the state exists through threats and claiming the monopoly on the use of aggressive violence and forcing people to pay for it. You can't get around that. You can't get around the fact that it is logically unsupportable to claim that an organization should be made to protect your property, and the only way that it can exist is by having access to take your property. Which goes back, by the way, you'll see in that documentary a scene from The Prisoner, which again, I hope everybody gets to watch that, and I hope you understand that when you're watching that, that show is talking to people on about 4 different levels. I mean, it goes really, really deep into philosophy, into religion, morality, ethics, and political and ethical philosophy. And in it, they have this concept called POP, which they mock. It's called protect other people. Somebody asked me over on Facebook, what do you suggest should be done? Or no, somebody posted about the CHAZ saying, well, you know, they should send tanks in, or that was one of his options. And I was like, you know, the president or somebody should send tanks in. And I was like, first of all, it's not constitutional. Second of all, that means you're forcing somebody, in order to take back that private property or get it back for somebody, you're taking somebody else's private property to fund the army and the military to go in and take the private property back from the people who've taken it. How does that help anything? I don't understand. I don't understand how facilitating that mindset and perpetuating that mindset helps anyone. I think it's better to expose it and say, are there better ways to operate, and not force people to have to pay when they don't want to pay for the military to go in and get somebody else's property back for them. I mean, you know, it's pretty straight up for me. But with that said, I'll draw your attention to what you saw a little bit earlier. This is video which was posted by this guy who's got the Telly Savalas thing, Who Loves Your Baby. And by the way, the Telly Savalas album, Who Loves Your Baby, is just classic. I used to play it all the time because he's got this song called Who Loves Your Baby, and it's hilarious, really bad. But anyway, God rest you, Telly. You were all right, man. He was a tough dude, I think. Telly was all right. So anyway, it says here, Italians in South Philadelphia protecting Columbus statue. Don't mess around. Now, a lot of people on the right-wing side who are upset that the left-wingers are going after certain historic icons and statues and stuff like that. And as an aside, later I'll draw your attention to one of the classic examples of why people are just inflamed and out of their minds about this stuff and not seeing the deeper, what I consider to be the core of the lesson. I think it is the core of the lesson. You know, I don't want to sound like, you know, I'm some erudite guy saying, well, you're not seeing the deeper meaning here. But I think in order to get to the root, that means being radical. You get to the root of something. The root of this is something that people are not discussing on the whole, except for voluntarists and libertarians, which is the tragedy of the commons. So in my video, I mentioned that the tragedy of the commons pits all these people against each other. And then I go through other things in my thesis about why it contributes, why public property versus private property. Public property, you're more likely to get people arguing over how it's going to be used. It can't be utilized in all the ways that people want it utilized. That creates the tragedy of the commons. People argue, there's dissension. And then when it's not your property and your decisions really aren't, they don't come back to you in a feedback loop, either in the positive or negative, you're much more likely, as the moral hazard strictures explain, you're much more likely to be reckless, and when it's somebody else's property, you don't care about it, right? So as much as you would your own. I mean, people have tested this throughout the centuries. So what's interesting about this is that this was praised. This story here was praised by many conservatives. They're like, oh yeah, they're protecting the Christopher Columbus statue. Well, if you watch it, it's a perfect example of the tragedy of the commons leading to what we see as the madness of crowds. So check this out. It's, how long is it? 48 seconds? Watch this.
I'm scared.
There's a liberal guy.
Let
me pause it here. Let me pause it. We'll go back. There's a liberal guy. They claim somebody from, I think it was some website. I think it was like a gay rights website or something like that, like Pink something or other. I think they claimed that this person who was filming this was a reporter for them, a journalist for them, or something like that. I don't know, but whoever it is, just a guy there who's asking questions, who feels differently about Columbus than these people do, right? It's in South Philly, and So yeah, I think it's, what is it, Marconi Park or something like that? So here it is.
I'm scared. Aren't you embarrassed?
These people are guarding.
I'm giving you my business card, sir, if there's a problem.
Aren't you embarrassed?
Let's get a business. So I'll go back. So they're guarding with guns.
Embarrassed?
I can give you my business card, sir, if there's a problem.
Aren't you embarrassed?
Throws the card away.
You're embarrassed. You're an embarrassment. You're an embarrassment.
So what do you think about how Christopher Columbus cut off the hands of people who didn't bring him enough gold?
They were fucking savages back then. They all.
This guy just hit me in the head. Sir, can I have my bike back? Sir, let me have my bicycle.
You want to talk shit, get the fuck out of here.
I'm scared.
All right, so there you go. So dude comes over, takes the dude's property away from him, drags it out, of course, because they're all on the same sidewalk, takes the guy's bike, starts pulling it away from him. Then another guy comes over with a blade, it looks like like a box cutter or something like that, and slices the tires on the dude's bike. It's like, what? You know, like, didn't you see the way the violence erupted over people who were upset about something they felt very strongly about, which was police misconduct and how they thought it was being applied for racial reasons? And now you're there responding to this by standing up for what you think is important, and none of you can see that this area here is government run. It's the tragedy of the frigging commons. Everybody's tax money is being used for it, so everybody thinks I should have a say in what happens to that statue. So these people come down because they feel strongly about Columbus, and they think it's important to remember Columbus's so-called discovery of America, which is, a bit of a story. But, it was something else to go across the ocean like that and do that in those boats, right? Even though in the book 1421, it was shown by Gavin Menzies that a Chinese emperor sent 5 junks all the way around the world in the year 1421. He beat all those people. And of course, we know the Vikings, the Norse had come over. They were trading back and forth. They'd come over through Greenland, Iceland, the whole thing. So Iceland, Greenland, down through Nova Scotia. But anyway, so it's just amazing. It's like, oh, this is so sad and frustrating, because the lesson that comes out of this is this. It's a great example of what I tried to explore in my New Liberty Conspiracy video. I had just posted the video when I saw this last night. A few right-wing folks are praising the armed people guarding the statue while overlooking the fact that one of those guys used a box cutter to slash the tires of the visitor filming them and engaging in mild debate. Meanwhile, people on the left are upset that armed folks would guard what they see as a symbol of evil. Neither group is looking at the heart of the problem, the tragedy of the commons. The statue is on public grounds, maintained via tax cash. So how can everyone's views be represented, let alone represented in the proportion to what they pay in taxes to support the thing? So sad. The madness of crowds is made more likely when government commons is involved or are involved. Depends how you want to look at it. All right. So I'll remind you, if you get a chance, please tell people about this video. I worked real hard on it. And Dan Dix, he's been demonetized. PayPal, no, not PayPal. GoFundMe shut him down, so he had to find another thing. Dan's done some great work. Okay, and to round things off, 2 things. First, here's this one. Surprise, Hillary Clinton changes position on public gatherings to attack Donald Trump. Now, that isn't, I don't think that's the way that I titled it originally, but the editor put that in there. Obviously, MRC TV, a little bit more traditional constitutionalist. I said for political reasons or whatever. But I shot a video on this one too, and that hopefully will be coming out. It's a super brief one, but I went full bore because, as you know, I've been getting these crazy headaches sometimes. And so basically, when I know I'm feeling pretty good, I really have to, put it all out there. I got to turn the burners on because I don't know whether or not the next day I'm going to be feeling pretty crappy. So you just have to push it. It's like being in the mosh pit. You got to go. You know, as the damn say, go! Ladies and gentlemen, how do? Anyway, so this is just great, and I'm not going to give it all to you, but go over to MRC TV if you want to. Look for the MRC TV Facebook page. Join that if you get an opportunity. Join the Liberty Conspiracy over there, and do a little hangout on the mrctv.org page, because this will be out there. It'll be in a video on the YouTube page as well. What I think is so great, though, is a comment. I was watching this one earlier. This is Brian Rose and David Icke over at London Real. And I really like Brian Rose. I love the stuff that he did with Graham Hancock. He's a really interesting dude. Sean Atwood's great. If you get to watch Sean Atwood over in the UK, Sean's got a terrific YouTube channel. He's got, like, you know, what is it, 300,000 subscribers. So a lot of people know his stuff. It's probably more than that now, probably 400,000. He's awesome. But anyway, so Brian Rose, an American, used to trade on Wall Street, moved over to London, started London Real years ago, and it's just fascinating. Just talks to people he finds interesting, and I think he's actually in the city of London, you know, what's known as the city of London, where a lot of the trading goes on. But anyway, he's talking about David Icke, and David Icke, I wrote it down. It's just so stinking great. He's talking about the hypocrisy of people like Hillary Clinton and others. And he didn't specify what I talked about in my piece about. So Hillary Clinton, in my piece, I explained that she, at first, is all in favor of people from Black Lives Matter going out and marching. Like, yeah, rah, rah, go out there and march. And then literally a half hour later, in 30 minutes, that's the way I had in my headline. She changes her position on public gatherings in 30 minutes or something like that for political reasons. Literally 33 minutes later, on her Twitter feed, she changes her position. And I got to hand it to Sean Hannity. I don't agree with him a lot of times. I agree with him on some things, but it was on his website where I saw this. I don't know how I spotted it. It must have been on Gab or something like that where I saw it. And it was Gab Trends maybe. But just unbelievable. She's tweeting about how Donald Trump's gatherings, if they have to come with health waivers, they shouldn't have them. In other words, it depends on why you're going out, not the threat of the virus. Hillary Clinton, who on her Twitter feed is wearing one of those virus so-called protection mask things. So David Icke, just to round this off with this, and there's one other thing I'll finish off here. David Icke goes, you know, he's talking about how they're so hypocritical. Like, if it's to get people out marching and protests, possible looting, you know, to further the agenda on the racial conflicts and stuff like that, and to further the identity politics stuff. Absolutely. Everybody, it's the most noble thing, go out there and march, right? But if you're marching, say, to protest the fact that your business has been shut down, or you can't go to church, or you can't go visit with a family member, or, oh, I don't know, maybe your grandmother in a nursing home has seen the governor of New York stuff somebody who's viral positive into the nursing home, or any of the other dumb things the government has done. Like now in Massachusetts, you got to wear masks. Just incredible. He says, you know, this double standard is ridiculous. And he says, this is the first woke virus. David Icke, man. Yeah, Icke, you're the dude. Way to go. It's friggin' great. The first woke virus. It doesn't attack people who are going out for politically correct reasons. If you're a social justice warrior, you're immune. I've got social justice immunity. Who needs a vaccine? I'm an SJW. Yeah. Icke. Dude. And by the way, his book, The Trigger, is excellent. It's really, really good. Like I don't necessarily, buy into, or, that's sort of a sloppy term. I don't necessarily find super validity with a lot of his theories. He knows a ton more than I do about the history of secret groups and cults and the esoteric and imagery and stuff like that. Wow, it's amazing. His research on 9/11 and the details he provides in that book, The Trigger, it's like an 800, 900 page book. It is devastating. This dude is really sharp, David Icke. And I think everybody knew that. And he's very fair and he's a very kind guy. towards the ideas of peace and being good, being a good person. And I'll leave this for you. Just talk about the tragedy of the commons. So this is Boston. They've got this statue that's dedicated to Abraham Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation. It's a perfect example of the Northern mentality about Abraham Lincoln and how historically ignorant, especially people in Massachusetts are. Massachusetts, New York, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Vermont as well, sadly. In many ways, just unbelievably ignorant. So as you'll see, and I don't agree necessarily with everything that this person says, but I just wanted to bring it up. Emancipation Proclamation statue in Boston coming down. In fact, I made much the same point, blah, 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 blah. Here it is. Yes, the Emancipation Proclamation statue in Boston is condescending. They say it's condescending towards blacks, that it's somehow an example of the white man, you know, towering over and having power over the black man. The guy's kneeling and he's like, you know, some great savior or whatever, which sadly is the way that Lincoln is depicted, the great savior of the black race or something like that in the United States. And it couldn't be further from the truth. He was a racist guy, wanted black people shipped back to Africa, said that blacks could never be equal in achievement or intellect or something like that to white human beings. Sort of equated them with like animals. It was like, what the heck, man? And it was like, can you imagine? It's freaking crazy. And I'm paraphrasing here, so you know, obviously it's going to be open to some criticism from you guys if you're like, well, that's not exactly what he said. But the key thing is the Emancipation Proclamation didn't free any slaves. It didn't apply to the North. It applied to nothing, because he was saying, I say that in the South, in other words, the states that had said that they had seceded from the Union, I command that the slaves are free. Well, how can you do that? First of all, it's not even constitutional in the first place. All you can say is that you wouldn't enforce any laws that would be federal laws regarding slaves traveling over state borders in the North, in the Union, because the South had seceded. They weren't part of the Union anymore. Virginia has it in their constitution. They have a right to secede. It's like, duh, right? So it just blows my mind that people can look at that and they think it's a step, and it just reinforces this historical mythology of Lincoln being this great dude. And again, I'll draw your attention to Jeffrey Rogers Hummel's book, Emancipating Slaves, Enslaving Free Men. There's interviews with him and speeches of him on YouTube, as long as they haven't been purged. And he's just a liberty-minded guy, and he just goes through the history of stuff. He's like, look, you know, a lot of the beliefs about Lincoln, they're not right. Even more radically critical of Lincoln is Thomas D. Lorenzo, The Real Lincoln, Lincoln Unmasked. Just awesome. Of course, he wrote Hamilton's Curse. Phenomenal stuff. Great stuff. So, you know, Lincoln was a corrupt, perfidious, nasty dude. He lied. He, as I said, he made more money off of selling land back to the government in the unconstitutional transcontinental railroad deal that he knew was happening just outside of Springfield. He bought a bunch of land. He made more money in that land deal than he did his entire career as a lawyer. Yeah, and anybody who knows anything about the Civil War knows that he was deceptive. And he was able to goad the South into firing the first shot at Fort Sumter, which was his goal. That was his intent. Just you know, sort of like what FDR did with the Japanese to goad them into firing the first, you know, engaging the first attack on Pearl Harbor. And of course, he put the oil embargo against them. So anyway, just wanted to mention all those things to you. It's a big one. I actually only intended this to be like 10 minutes long. So maybe I'll split it into two. I don't think so. I'll probably put it out as one thing. A lot of people look at the time and it's like, oh, this is a long one. I don't know if I'm going to watch the whole thing. So we'll see. But anyway, thank you so much for everything you've done so far, everybody. And do remember, if you have the opportunity, tell everybody about what we're doing. And we'll have videos of all sorts of different lengths. Please check us out on YouTube and on BitChute and ask people to join you and subscribe and like. And so until next time, I'll say, be seeing you.